They're going after white nationalists or, the white supremacists. But a couple of years ago, remember, they were going after the Russia bomb. So Russia was somehow ferociously active on the internet promoting Donald Trump. So that's their interest. Then you have the interest of the mainstream media that obviously want to remove any alternative to their essentially propaganda. And so therefore they've been campaigning against independent media for quite a long time. And they've been very active in seeking to deplatform voices that they did not like. It's a kind of remarkable thing for journalists seeking to deplatform and remove from cyberspace other journalists. But that's what the mainstream media have been doing. And CNN is continually badgering the internet providers, platforms. So, hey,
actors, and now, of course, it appears.
Hey, Jamarl, you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Let me hang up on your phone. Oh, you already did. Okay, cool. Gotcha.
They have friends in Congress, and they're hoping basically
will succeed to some extent in doing so. I mean, this seems to be, in a larger sense, the empire striking back. We're with Trump, with his political coup back in 2016, and it really was a coup in a deeper sense, where there was, for the first time in decades, an alternative sort of oppositional figure in American politics, even though he was in bed with plenty of big business at the time. And, he had his own deep flaws, which we saw come out just a couple of weeks ago in terms of the rhetoric and what he was able to do there. But still, what you had was some genuine opposition, some genuine alternative to the United States that, admittedly, while it deeply polarized Americans, that polarization at least brought some things to light that seemed to be worthwhile topics of conversation. And what we have at this point is, you're saying it's definitely pushback against Trump specifically, but it is at the same time pushback against any feasible political opposition to the status quo in American politics and in American media. You had these deeper sea changes, specifically with the rise of the internet, and really through the internet, the rise of sort of alternative ways of getting information and alternative ways of finding out and propagating certain points of view, good and bad, that could critique, that could stand as sort of feasible, accessible, more or less accessible alternatives to what people on the news and in Congress want you to know and are trying to tell you, frankly. And there was an opposition there for a while back. There was an alternative, and that alternative is quickly shrinking. It's quickly being cut off at the bud by big tech companies. And it's as far as I can tell, it's going to go forward apace. Now, the thing is, Parlor has come back. Parlor, just a couple of days ago, I think on Sunday, posted a sort of return, or it was yesterday actually, posted a return to their website. They apparently have found other hosting, I think through Epic, which, while it's being talked about in the media as a Russian-based service, is actually, as far as I can tell, based out of Washington. There's some complication there. Anyway, they're back. They have a simple message up on their front page, but they haven't come back in full form yet. They're not a social media platform again at this point. But if they manage to get back on there, I don't see how Congress and like you're talking about these big tech companies, I don't see how they're not going to try to go after them wherever they come out. It's going to be a game of whack-a-mole as far as I can tell. And what's probably going to happen pretty quickly is Congress is going to push for more powers to allow for different companies and for different public agencies potentially to just knock them out right at the butt. I don't know enough of the details to know exactly how that's going to go down. I've been reading about this, but still, there are different ways this could go. It seems like we're headed there. And you're talking about the Patriot Act. If there's a Patriot Act 2.0, it's going to be a deeper and more pervasive one that I think we're going to be a lot more aware of, and that people in public are going to be defending it as they have a lot of these responses to Trump for years. So it's going to become a part of public conversation in a way that the first Patriot Act was, as far as I can tell, almost universally reviled by the public. George, what's your take on that? You're talking about Patriot Act 2.0. How do you see that happening? What form do you see that taking, and what effects do you think that's going to have?
Well, I think that it will primarily be in the form of the repression of speech. It will be the banning of alternative views under the rubric of the threat of violence. Because that's one that we've seen people get afraid of that, and that's an easy one to go with. And I imagine there will also be extensive FBI infiltration of chat rooms, websites, groups, and so on. Much as they did during the first Patriot Act, seeking to, I think, instigate terror plots that they can then uncover as if, well, we have uncovered yet another white supremacist terrorist organization plotting I don't know what, much as they did throughout during the War on Terror years, in which every single Islamist plot that they uncovered was actually instigated by an undercover FBI agent. So I think that there was going to be that aspect. But I think, I think that they are going to try to deplatform as many alternative viewpoints as they can, because just simply saying, hey, well, this is this is a threat of extremism. There might be some violence down the end of the road. Now, of course, that is a violation of the First Amendment, but they always have this absurd argument that they fall back on, which is, well, we're a private company, we can do it, and so therefore there's no for the First Amendment doesn't get involved. But of course, it is involved when you dominate the public space in the way that the internet giants do, and particularly if they're colluding, then First Amendment issues are involved. But I think that that's clearly going to be one aspect, but there'll also be, I think, a pushback taking place elsewhere. I mean, we've already had governments filing. We had the federal government has filed an antitrust suit against Google. That's been joined by state governments. I am sure that the Biden administration will try to push back against that, and it may not go all that far. Nonetheless, that has started. And then you have other countries that are becoming alarmed about the power that's devolved on these internet giants. They don't really like Twitter coming into their countries' elections and deciding the outcome, which candidates they support, which candidates they don't support. So I think there may well be a pushback from other countries against the power of the internet giants.
I think you're right. No, you know what? We need to go to a break, George, but I think you're absolutely right. I think that this is going to lead to a kind of new digital nationalism, something like this, where we, for all that we complained about China's Great Firewall years ago, I think that we're going to see our own kind pop up soon enough, because if other countries can provide some reasonable alternative, if Germany, for instance, I saw Merkel complaining about what Twitter was doing. If the German news media starts to provide, and I'm not trying to single them out too much because I don't have high hopes, but if they start to provide, for instance, some alternative, are we going to start to shut their websites down? Or are we going to suppress access to their news? I don't know if it's going to go that far at first, but in the long run, it might. I'm really, really worried about this. And with AOC, a sort of leading nominally progressive figure in Congress talking about how we're going to have to rein in our media environment so you can't just spew disinformation and misinformation. Who exactly is she talking to there? I don't think she's just talking to Parlor. I think she's talking to the New York Post. I think she's talking to established news outlets, established media outlets in the States and potentially abroad who, storied, like have a historical background that they're coming to us with. For whatever you think of them now, that's not Twitter. Those aren't random users on Twitter, and that's not a blog that anybody can start. That is something with a deep history. And I'm guessing that she's partly talking to them. They certainly responded to her as if she were. Anyway, we need to go into a break. We are joined by George Samueli. George is a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute and author and co-host, along with Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle, which is airing now on YouTube. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in just a minute on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines. Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. Forgive me, my voice is a little hoarse this morning, or a lot hoarse. Joining us, Peter Lavelle is not here. However, we do have George Samueli. Samueli, thank you, I appreciate that. Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute and author and co-host of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle, airing now on YouTube. George, the Ukraine. So just to pivot here, Joe Biden, during the time that he was vice president, was basically a viceroy of Ukrainian politics. I mean, everything in from forming aspects of the government. Now that Joe Biden is going to be president, this is kind of welcome back type scenario. What do you think is going to take place between the U.S. and Ukraine with Biden's stewardship, forming, basically coming back to this position of authority and engaging with the former country to which he used to be the viceroy?
Right. Well, one has to start off with the premise that Biden and the people around Biden really don't care very much about Ukraine and Ukrainians. What they really care about is making life difficult for Russia, that they use Ukraine in order to exacerbate tensions with Russia. So from their point of view, if they can make things worse in Ukraine, if they can ratchet up tensions in the southeast of Ukraine, maybe encourage some kind of a military offensive against the breakaway regions, the Donbass, then that's good for the United States, because either the breakaway regions are crushed by the Kiev government, in which case Russia is humiliated, or Russia is drawn into the war, and that leads to a major crisis for Russia. Russia will be diplomatically isolated. It will be its economic and commercial ties with Europe will be damaged. And so again, that will be bad for Russia, and therefore, in the view of the people coming in with Biden, that's good for America. So that's why what I think they will do is I think they will ratchet up tensions in Ukraine. I think that they see this as good for them. Now, of course, it's disastrous for everybody in Ukraine, not just for the people in the Donbass. I mean, it's disastrous for the entire country. But as the way they look at it in the kind of zero-sum game mentality, it's good for the United States because it'll be bad for Russia. I mean, we've seen everything that has happened since the coup of 2014. I mean, Ukraine is now the second poorest country in Europe. It has an ongoing civil war in the southeast. It's lost Crimea. But as far as the Obama and Biden and the people who were in the Obama-Biden administration and who have now come back, such as Victoria Nuland, they regard this as successful because it set Russia and Ukraine, two essentially brother countries, against one another.
You're slightly closer over there, and it seems like what's been going on for a handful of years now, since 2014, 2015 effectively, is you have the Luhansk People's Republic, you have the Donetsk People's Republic, two sort of isolated semi-states on the periphery of Russia and Ukraine that broke free from Ukraine after the United States did its coup effectively. And it seems like there has been ongoing deadly but intermittent artillery sort of trench warfare where the lines have shifted occasionally, but for the most part are static. When you're talking about the U.S. trying to pick that conflict back up and exacerbate it, frankly, how do you what form do you see that taking? Do you see it just trying to take those territories back, trying to work with the Ukrainian government to take back those republics? Where do you see that going, George?
I think that's could well be the case. Encouraging a military offensive, maybe providing subsidies to the government in Kiev on the understanding that they will exacerbate conflict there. I don't think that despite for public consumption, the Biden people talk about, we must continue with the Minsk process, and we need reconciliation. They do not want reconciliation. For them, this is a good thing because it weakens Russia. I mean, it's obviously a major blow for Russia to have bad relations with Ukraine. I mean, it's a blow. I mean, it undermines Russia's pretense of being a great power, a kind of a major geopolitical player, if the country that is culturally and linguistically closest to it is really an enemy. So it's bad for Russia, and that's how the Biden people think. I mean, you must remember these are people who really are extremely hostile to Russia. I mean, we've had 4 years of Russiagate, which, remember, it was launched by Obama and Biden. They explicitly launched Russiagate and have been banging on about it for 4 years. Nancy Pelosi again brought up the whole all roads lead to Putin. Trump is Putin's puppet. So this is still their line, which is that the absolute hostility toward Russia. And therefore, for them, this is a kind of a no-brainer to I think encourage Kiev to be as obdurate, recalcitrant, and as aggressive as possible, just in order to make headaches for the Russians.
Well, I guess for me, I wasn't sure whether or not. Well, that's not true. The Russia thing to me was an assault on Trump. Basically, Democrats were out of power. They needed some way to constrain Trump's behavior, and they needed a way to explain how the most establishment of candidates, the greatest candidate in the history of candidates, how she could possibly lose to reality show hosts. Mm-hmm. And it's trying to find a way to explain that the Russia attack was the fastest thing moving, and it was the one that Hillary Clinton went with. Now that Donald Trump is lost, though, is this still the attack that they go with? Meaning now that Biden is back in office, I agree with you that trying to corral and change the thrust of this attack is difficult, if not impossible, to pull off. I mean, they've been screaming about this for 3 years. But is this something that Biden and the people who are in charge actually believe, or is this something that they were just pushing for political effect against Trump? And now that Trump is on his way out, do they still languish in this particular pool? Or is this somewhat of a change? Or is this a situation where they're stuck with what they've been screaming about for 3 years? And so regardless of what Biden wants to do in that office, basically the arguments that they've led for all of this time, they're stuck with. Meaning there is no way to form a good relationship with Russia after this. There is no way, especially from the standpoint of his base and the people that he's seeded with this information all this time. Meaning, do they change potentially, or are they stuck with what they got because of what they've done for the last 3 years?
Well, I think that it's unlikely that there'll be much of a change given the personnel that are coming in with Biden. I mean, we have Victoria Nuland, who was the architect of the coup of 2014. She's going to be number 3 in the State Department and will obviously be the, quote, expert, unquote, on Ukraine. I'm sure she will take the lead on Ukraine policy. You've got the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Blinken is someone who his particular bailiwick is Syria. He thinks that that's an unfinished conflict, and therefore also wants to make life difficult for Russia in Syria. Therefore, again, if you escalate the regime change operation in Syria, again, making headaches for Russia. I think that's Blinken's mentality. Blinken is also kind of a humanitarian interventionist. He was a humanitarian interventionist in the 90s when he worked in the Clinton administration. He was a humanitarian interventionist over Libya, big champion of the Libya bombing.
George, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we're coming to the end of the hour, but I really do appreciate you coming on. The voice that you guys have been listening to is George Samueli. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Samueli. Excellent. George Samueli, Senior Researcher Fellow at the Global Policy Institute and author and co-host of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle, airing now on YouTube. You can watch Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle on YouTube and follow Peter on Twitter at PL Crosstalk and George on Twitter at George Samueli. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That means, more likely than not, you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, at least 1,440 new coronavirus deaths and 142,588 new cases were reported in the United States on January 18th. Over the past week, there's been an average of 207,495 cases per day, a decrease of 7% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of Tuesday morning, more than 24,126,000 100 people in the United States have been affected with coronavirus, and just over 399,000 have died. There's a new mask in town. German authorities have been wearing an FFP2 face mask, which filters over 90% of airborne particles, mandatory when out in public in a bid to contain the spread of the new coronavirus and its mutations. The southeastern state of Bavaria and Austria have already made it mandatory to wear FFP2 masks. Trump's White House announced yesterday that entry ban would end on January 26, which includes restrictions on the UK, most of the EU, and Brazil. Biden spokeswoman Jen Psaki immediately tweeted, quote, "On the advice of our medical team, the administration does not intend to lift these restrictions on 1/25. In fact, we plan to strengthen the public health measures around international travel in order to further mitigate the spread of COVID-19. It's said as if we are not the ground for this. I mean, we have outstriped pretty much every other country in the number and the people who have died or been affected with this illness. So yes, I accept that, there's a travel ban coming into the United States, but let's not pretend that we are not the main thrust of this at this point. I'm curious about the FFP2 mask and whether or not they're going to supply those masks to the population. I would imagine there would be some people in the population that can't afford the mask. There had to be provisions made for those people to get it. Let's keep going. Washington State has planned a private-public partnership between the health department and other businesses, healthcare, and labor leaders to boost the state's COVID-19 vaccinations. Kaiser Permanente will help plan for mass vaccinations, while Starbucks helps with the operational efficiency, and Microsoft provide the technology expertise. President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration is tomorrow, and U.S. agencies are on their toes. Washington Post reported on an FBI intelligence report that summarized the plan by QAnon members to infiltrate the inauguration by posing as U.S. National Guard soldiers. Last week, acting chief of Metropolitan Police Department said more than 20,000 soldiers from the National Guard will be on hand in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration. The Pentagon has already called on the FBI to vet National Guard troops in D.C. and allegations that participants in the January 6 Capitol siege could have been helped by those assigned to protect the building for the inauguration. In addition to monitoring for lone wolves and insider threats, the FBI is also bracing for armed protests planned in all 50 capitals across the country on Inauguration Day, which is, of course, tomorrow. Shane, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, we've had the huge protests. We've had the people raiding the Capitol. Do you think this is much to do about nothing because of the response of the state? Or do you think that in the face of the states pushing back and ensuring, dotting their I's and due diligence to ensure that no attacks will take place, do you think they will still basically throw themselves into the teeth of the animal? What do you think?
I do not think that nearly as many people are going to come out as did 2 Wednesdays ago, almost 2 weeks ago. I think that what's going to happen is you're going to see some small groups who are standing up against a pretty heavily occupied Capitol area with, the National Guard in there, thousands of troops on the ground effectively, and there's going to be no insurrection this time. There's going to be no attempted insurrection this time. And that, that's partly because of what Trump did, honestly. A lot of his supporters probably hoped that they would be able to get definitely hoped that they would be able to get something significant done. So they went up, they marched on Washington, they took over the Capitol building. By all appearances, if they'd been more organized and if Trump had been on their side and if they'd had some of the military on their side, they might have been able to pull off an actual bona fide coup. Now, thankfully, they didn't. But the fact is, Trump, while he said the day of that he loved them and that they were very special, he didn't really support them tactically. He just incited them to act sort of tacitly. and then nothing actually came of it. And of course, the next day he turned their backs on them and called them criminals. So I think that his support is still strong, but it's definitely dwindled. The fact that he's off Twitter, the fact that he has lost that, major public platform, and the fact that so many of them, QAnon has been driven out of public spaces for months now. I don't like anybody being driven out of public spaces, but if there's one group that I'm like, okay, I could kind of see that making sense, it's probably closer to being Q. Not even for the misinformation. It's just, I don't know, man. We haven't really talked about them. They're crazy, and they've been crazy for a long time. It is like a large-scale political cult that self-perpetuates based on prophecies of what's going to happen, has strong religious overtones, and yeah, once you're bought into it, it seems pretty hard to get out of it. But that's kind of a separate topic. When it comes to tomorrow, I don't think that much is going to happen. I think that will be taken as a victory, of course, by the establishment. And I think that what's most important is what's going to come on the other side of the inauguration once Biden's in the White House and once he has a more or less unified administration under him that can start to really crack down, like we were talking about with George, crack down on alternatives to that status quo, to that political status quo that is continuing to dominate our politics. With Trump, from a wider sense, and I want to hand it back to you. I never liked Trump as a person, but what he provided, at least on the surface, was some very visible alternative to the way that things were going. I thought that his foreign policy was probably better than most of his predecessors, so that's good. That's the first sort of order of operations, is making sure that more people don't die internationally at American hands. And then there was some stuff that I liked about his economic policies, like bringing manufacturing back to the States. Those are the kind of key principal reasons for why I was like, okay, I could see this potentially being positive. And then a deeper reason, it was a big question mark, and still in my mind remains a big question mark, is he, as a political figure, as an oppositional figure, is he going to bring enough issues to light in terms of, is he going to shift the Overton window of what America does sufficiently for America to engage in self-reflection and actually start to repair itself on some of these deeper levels in terms of our foreign policy, our wars, our economic policy, the whole reserve currency thing and how that's affected our economy over decades. Now, is that conversation being had? No, frankly. The conversation has not been had. Trump, as a political figure, his flaws have dominated the conversation. His aggressiveness towards large parts of the population, just rhetorically, you saw that this summer. That's what's been in the headlines, and that's certainly dominated private conversations about Trump. It is him as a person. It's not America. And so that opportunity was missed. I'm really sad to say. We could have been having those conversations over years, but I think that the establishment media worked hard to make sure we didn't. Anyway, I've talked long enough here. Jamarl.
I think I agree with you on that. When Donald Trump came into office, I think I've said it before, there was this tiny, tiny kernel of me that hoped that he would be different. Because my thought was, all right, the Republican establishment hates him. The Democratic establishment hates him. All right, let's see. He's unmoored from our political system. Maybe he does something different. That was my thought. And when it became apparent that that wasn't going to take place, is what I thought, right? And so, yeah, there were hopes, but those hopes were pretty dashed pretty quickly. And now Biden comes in. So, yeah, I agree with you, Shane. There was the potential for something else. There was a hope that there might be something else that may be unmoored from our current one-party state. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump was just a Republican. And, yeah, he had these kind of worse faces of that party. But at the end of the day, he was just a Republican. Everything else was just talk. If nothing else, he was cowed into various positions. The weakest strongman in the history of strongmen. And let's go to this other point. Pardon Assange, pardon Snowden, and release, I know I'm sounding like Tarif now, but yeah, release the documents. If you want to release the documents about the Russian hacking and all this other stuff, do it. You're in a position for the next, day or so. Last chance. Do it. They are not going to be so kind towards you when you leave office. Just saying. An alleged Capitol rioter, Riley Williams, has been accused of being the recorded woman stealing Nancy Pelosi's laptop or hard drive. Her former partner, turned her in, saying that she planned to give it to someone to sell to Russia's foreign intelligence service, but the plan fell through. She surrendered herself to authorities last night. That's fascinating to me. If I wanted to sell something to Russian foreign authorities, I have no idea where to go to for that. And apparently she found that within the first few days. That's astonishing to me. Funny, but astonishing. And her partner turned her in. That makes it that much more weirder. Shane, what do you think about this? I mean, well, let's do this. Let's get to a few more headlines because I want to talk about this one. If I had to make a choice, reports are coming out that Trump will issue up to 100 pardons or commutations before he leaves office on the 20th. Apparently, the list will be announced tomorrow. Assange activist Pamela Anderson has made a final plea to Trump, urging him to, quote, do the right thing, unquote, and pardon WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Anderson said on Tucker Carlson's show, quote, the entire world wants, or most want him to pardon Julian Assange. This is the time to share, or this is the time to shine and really make an impression on the world. If this goes to trial, that is going to be the end of the First Amendment, unquote. I agree with Pamela Anderson on this. Julian Assange should be pardoned, and I don't quite see that happening under the Biden administration. What do you think, Shane? If you wanted to really stick a thumb in the eye of the various intelligence services, of the people who you believe was out to get you, this is one way to do it. What do you think, Shane?
It would be great. And I don't know the procedure here, but wouldn't Biden just try to reverse that? Is it? But I guess that, the pardon is definitely a strong presidential power. But just briefly, Jamarl, what's your take on that?
I don't know if you can reverse a pardon. I don't know if it works that way. I mean, you might be able to bring additional charges. But I don't know if you can, it's like, I'm going to undo this. I don't know if there's a double bite at the apple. But he may be able to bring up additional charges. I mean, I got to be honest, though. This is an assault on the First Amendment. Even Rachel Maddow understood that. Like, Rachel Maddow hates Assange because for her mind and all the Democrats' mind, he was responsible for Hillary Clinton losing the race. That's the way they frame this. And so for Rachel Maddow to come out and do a report basically balking her audience, that's a big deal. I mean, this happened about a year or so ago. But even she recognizes the problem this poses to people who are in that particular area. This is it's an attack on the First Amendment. And so, look, if Trump is going to do it, this is his time to do it. And I think he should. So, and Snowden, by the way. And Snowden. We have a few more. Let's go through a few more. Mexico's president has made an appeal to the incoming Biden administration requesting that the United States change its immigration policy. The comments came as thousands of migrants clashed with the police in Guatemala after the police set up a roadblock. Brazil's government has begun distributing thousands of doses of China's coronavirus vaccine. The country's inoculation program began yesterday, 2 weeks earlier. On Sunday, Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny was detained after return to Russia from Germany, where he was being treated after an alleged nerve agent poisoning. And this is the last. Incoming president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, won re-election for the sixth term with 58.64%, while opposition candidate Robert, let's just call him Robert, also known as Bobby Wine, got 34.83% of the vote. Wine and its National Unity platform announced they were planning to file a lawsuit claiming the election was rigged. The military has reportedly blocked the party's offices in the capital and surrounded Wine's house. Uganda authorities are accusing the United States of meddling in the election after U.S. Ambassador Natalie Brown attempted to visit Wine, who is currently under house arrest. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's end this here and let's come back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with Chris Smalls. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Feel free to call. Joining us is Christian Smalls, an activist and founder of TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers, a collective of essential workers and allies across the United States. He is best known as organizer responsible for staging the walkout at an Amazon regional fulfillment center in Staten Island, New York, following the company's failure to protect him and his fellow workers despite learning an employee had tested positive for COVID-19. Kristen, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. I saw an article on, I believe it was NPR, and they were basically talking about Amazon workers finally coming together to form a union. And my first thought was, we got to get Chris on the show, because I thought this was somewhat of a momentous moment. I mean, you basically have Jeff Bezos making like nearly $500 billion. You have a society of retail that has basically collapsed, and Amazon picking up the gap because of the infinitely foreseeable changes in regards to the way people shop. I mean, if you're telling me that me going out is risking my life, then yeah, I'm probably going to shop online. And the person they're probably going to go to is one of the largest people, Amazon. They have everything. So Amazon was able to benefit magnificently from this. The question becomes the workers. Since the workers are the ones who are actually doing the labor, they are the ones that accept the risk. They are the ones that are getting the boxes and then moving the boxes and then moving the shipments, meaning they are taking all the risks with Bezos expropriating the profits. So when I read that they were having a union, my first thought was, we got to get Chris on the show. So what do you think about this? Amazon and union and the various people at Amazon forming a union. This is a good thing, right?
Absolutely. This is a historical thing, actually. You know, this will be hopefully the first building in American history that'll be unionized. And I'm so happy that you're able to get me on the show and give me this platform, because this is a milestone for us. You know, we want other Amazon facilities, we want the whole nation to be unionized. And it's been so difficult to communicate that to other buildings and other workers. So hopefully when they see this story, and hopefully we have good news after the union vote, that the union vote was successful, this story can be used to galvanize other workers, that something can be done in their own facilities. And we're hoping that, Alabama, roll tide. We hope that'll be a tidal wave across the nation, that workers would now see that it's possible to even have a union vote. So this is a great opportunity for us.
And there is no doubt, Chris, thank you again for joining us. There's no doubt that Amazon is going to push back on this. I don't think they want this to happen on a larger scale. Okay. I don't mean to be gloomy right off the bat, but you know what I'm saying. And of course, that becomes part of the story too. That becomes part of the response to what they're doing. What do you see them doing in response, and what are you doing to prepare for that, Chris?
Amazon's going to use their normal union busting tactics. They already stalled this vote several times already. They tried to get even pushed back even further for another month, but this union is very resilient. They're very experienced. I speak and have spoken with the president of this union through my other members of my organization. Shout out to Randy Headley, who is the leader, the president of the union. And we stand in solidarity with them. We know that Amazon is going to try to fire workers, and if they're listening or tuning in, they just have to withstand all of that. They have to stand strong with their union, go through with the vote, stay together, and everything should play in our favor. We know what Amazon does. They're going to try to stall, fire you guys, and they're going to try to sway you guys that the union is not necessary, that they provide all the things that they need already. We already know the reality of this situation is not true. A worker has died in the facility on Friday. And I just spoke to some of the coworkers last night in the facility in Virginia. So like you mentioned, it's our lives that's on the line, not Jeff Bezos. We have to protect ourselves. So this is one way of doing it.
And I really 1,000% agree with this. What are some of the things that Amazon has done to push back? You mentioned firing workers. Like that's, I guess, the worst or the blunt edge of that, where they're like, look, you're fired. We don't want to, they would come up with excuses of the reasons the person was fired. But what are some of the other pushback mechanisms that Amazon use to either from the standpoint of surveillance or from the standpoint of ways to push back on the union formation?
Yeah, they're gonna go to workers individually probably, and they're gonna ask workers what do they, what are the things that they can do better for them to sway them. That's what they're gonna do. They're gonna offer them perks. They're gonna, give them incentives. Possibly, they're gonna do everything in their power with all the money that they have, and they already manipulated the NLRB. They're trying to appoint the lawyer and the judge on the case. They do a bunch of things. They have the power to do all of these things, which is unfortunate and very unfair, that the fact that this company is able to even infiltrate the NLRB, which should be a neutral party, but it's not true. They have lobbyists inside of that, organization as well. And it's sad that we have to face all of these, obstacles just to get a union vote. But we know we have to be resilient. We know what Amazon is capable of doing. And I think if the workers understand that this union is going to represent them the best way, they use the story, what happened. I don't know if you guys know about Google. Google just formed another union as well. If we use these stories to uplift the workers, then I really see that this could be a historical landmark for us. And I hope that's what happens. I really do.
I'll be honest, I do too. And I don't want to paint a sort of false picture here, but it's a little bit weird and ironic. I mean, you're talking about Google forming unions. I'm guessing the people like Google who are forming unions are like fairly well paid, pretty well compensated. If you're working at Google, by and large, you're not working in a factory like many who work at Amazon are. And so if the Amazonians, if the people, the factory workers like we're talking about, warehouse workers really at Amazon, if they can't get a union, it will be a sort of sadly ironic day in the history of union formation, where the sort of middle to upper classes of the tech establishment are able to unionize, and the working classes in the tech establishment can't. Looking back at Alabama, 6,000 workers set to vote on this. Any early signs of how they're going to vote? How do you think it's actually going to go down, Chris? What intel do you have at this point?
I don't want to share too much. They told me not to, but I can tell you this. I believe it's going to be an in-person vote. I believe they're going to set up shop inside the facility. Last that I heard, and I think that's the best way to do it. I think Amazon wanted to do like a mail-in ballot, but the union requested that they actually do in person at the facility, which I recommend as well. So there's transparency there. There's no way of Amazon, trying to infiltrate and change any numbers. Same thing, voter fraud. The union doesn't want anything behind the scenes. They want everything up front and transparent with the workers. And I think that's the best way, is in person at the facility, from what I heard.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it should be as easy as possible and as transparent as possible. What do you think? What would be the hedge against this from the standpoint of workers? I mean, you would think that this would be just somewhat of a, at least from my perspective, a straightforward, meaning for workers to get an entity that works in their interest seems to be a gimme. It seems to be straightforward. What would be the rationale and reasons for people pushing back against this that are workers themselves? Like, what is their hedge, or what is their headwind that they may have qualms about voting for something like a union?
I believe Amazon's going to use the pay wage. They're trying to make it about the fact that Amazon pays more, or will be offering more wage. But we can't rely on just wage. It's not about just the money. One thing I've learned is it's about workers' protections and workers' rights. Workers having the power to stand up without being retaliated, like myself. So it's more so about money, and I think that's the hedge that Amazon's going to use against the workers. Like, hey, this union doesn't pay this amount. We already do. Certain states, and they may not even be in Alabama. They're going to try to use other states like New York, for example, where workers get paid pretty much $20 an hour at entry level. But it's the cost of living up here. It doesn't really matter because it balances out. So we have to make sure that the workers in Alabama are aware of that it's not always about the wage. It's about the other things that are also important, like the protections for us speaking up whenever we have a health and safety concern. And I think that's more important than anything, because it's life or death right now during COVID-19.
Personally, I think the organization and the brainchild is the most important thing, meaning having the organization already there matters, as opposed to, let's say, COVID comes up and all of a sudden you need to come together with some kind of brain trust and figuring out what you need to do. No, I think it matters having the brain trust there already started, already pushing for the things that are in workers' interests. Chris, dude, I really thank you for coming on to the show to discuss this. Christian Smalls is an activist and founder of TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers, a collective of essential workers and allies across the United States. He is best known as an organizer responsible for staging walkout at Amazon Regional Fulfillment Center in Staten Island, New York, following the company's failure to protect him and his fellow workers despite learning an employee had tested positive for COVID-19. You can follow TCOEW on Twitter at TCOEW and on their website, tcoew.org. You can follow Chris on Twitter at ShutdownAmazon. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back here in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik.
I got Misty, but she has problems with audio just yet.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday,
I got her.
2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are joined by a new guest, Misty Winston. She's a political activist, organizer, and co-host of both the Facts on the Ground podcast and Free Assange Vigils. You can follow her on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust and the Facts on the Ground podcast on YouTube and on Twitter at FOTG Podcast. Misty, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to go to a recent tweet of yours. I'm just going to read this briefly. Part of me is extremely depressed by the level of delusion being witnessed around people's faith in elected officials. The other part of me is super interested to see what kind of excuses people will come up with when Dems don't do a goddamn thing for them. Now, this is, you're often talking about Assange. I'm sure this can be addressed to what has been done to Assange and what's currently being done to him. But this is also a sort of wider political commentary. Maybe we could start with Assange, though, and then come back to the state of politics, because I'm sure there's enough to talk about on both fronts. Do you think there's any chance that Trump is going to go through with a pardon for Assange within the next day in his sort of last gasping moments of ability to do so? Or do you think that's off the table? What's your take?
I mean, I'm generally a cynic by nature, so that part of me is saying no, but then there's the activist part of me who's been working really hard on this for a long time that desperately wishes for it to happen. It would be in his best interest, I think, for sure. This would definitely help, kind of boost his quote-unquote legacy. This is definitely a win that he needs, and this is much bigger than just Assange. This is a free speech thing, so, I doubt it, but I'm trying to keep that little bit of hope alive.
Yeah, because apparently he's supposed to be pardoning, 100 people or so today. What do you say? You're trying to keep hope alive. I really want Snowden and Assange to be part of this pardon group. Like, nobody's business. Do you think that this is going to be... if he doesn't pardon us, what is Trump waiting for? I mean, if he wants to really push back against intel services and the FBI and all of these people that he thinks were after him for these... 4 years? Wouldn't this be a thumb in the eye? Wouldn't this be something that would absolutely do this? And if he doesn't, what do you think is his hedge? I mean, what do you think is the headwind for Trump to do it?
This would be the biggest thumb in their eye. I mean, this would be absolutely the boldest move that he could make heading out of his presidency. This is something that I don't think, Republicans, Democrats, the intelligence agencies, none of them want to see Julian Assange specifically. I mean, Edward Snowden too. Snowden has gotten a bit more support over the past year or so. He's starting to kind of turn the tide on the narrative around his situation. But Julian Assange is somebody that nobody in Washington, D.C. likes. And, so this would be a massive way for him to really push back against the people who have been, going at him for 4 years. I don't know if he'll do it. Frankly, I don't know if he's brave enough. This is something that would take an immense amount of courage to push back against these very powerful people. So I would love to see it happen. I mean, I hope that he can find that sort of courage. He's also listening to some really terrible people on this issue, like Grinnell. So, I'm hoping that somebody who knows better can get in his ear and convince him that this is the right thing to do. Multiple people have tried. Pam Anderson was on Tucker Carlson last night, Jimmy Dore the night before. There have been people trying to get in his ear. I just don't know if he's going to find that, that courage to really do the right thing here.
I mean, you mentioned Grinnell. There's also Pompeo. I mean, Secretary of State Pompeo, who when he was CIA director back in April, I believe it was 2017, might have been 2018 at this point, though, said, called WikiLeaks a hostile foreign intelligence service. So that those lines are clearly drawn. And, for all that Trump was saying that he wanted to contest the power of the swamp, he admitted a crocodile into his own administration and put him in charge of one of the highest posts therein. So he's not going to, you know what, I'm with you on this. I'm pretty cynical too. He's had so much time. And while admittedly it would be a thumb in the eye of the establishment to do it as he's stepping out the door, so to speak, I don't see it, which is sad to say, because again, internationally, there is a decent amount of support for Assange. In Washington, D.C., maybe not. There are some of us, but internationally, just recently, WikiLeaks itself on Twitter was posting this Guardian article where 5 Nobel Prize recipients have come out in support of a pardon for Assange, in support of the idea that the United States backs off a bit. But sadly, I don't think that's going to happen, which leads the question. On the other side, he was recently denied extradition, but they're reviewing that case. What do you think Assange's fate is in the future? Where do you think he's going as a sort of political and journalistic figure on that high level? Misty?
Well, They have until today to file their appeal by end of business, close of business today in the UK. And I think that is almost for sure going to happen. I don't think that they're just going to drop this. I would love for that to happen. I don't think that will be the case. They'll wait till last minute. They'll file their appeal. And the issue with that is they can drag that appeal out for years. And Assange will just be languishing in Belmarsh prison that entire time. He's already in terrible health. He has an underlying lung condition. He's being surrounded by COVID patients. He's unable to see his family or his friends because of the lockdown and the quarantine and all of that stuff. So this is a really terrible situation. Honestly, I think that they're, best case scenario for them is that, they can just get him to die of COVID in prison, and then they can just kind of wash their hands of it and be done. That's just speculation on my part, but this is something that none of them really want to deal with. None of them really wants to be attached to, the destruction of the First Amendment, which is essentially what this is. This is the first time that a journalist is being charged under the Espionage Act. And that sets a unbelievably dangerous precedent moving forward. I mean, that will destroy investigative journalism, especially national security journalism. It's already had an unbelievable chilling effect. So moving forward, I don't really know what to expect, frankly. Joe Biden is not going to be an ally here. I don't think that anybody's under the delusion that he will be. But, we just have to keep pushing, keep fighting, keep moving forward, building support, and putting the pressure on.
What did you think of the judge's ruling? I thought that was one of the weirdest rulings ever. I mean, because she basically agreed with the U.S. Like, basically, I agree with the U.S.'s premise. Horrible. Right. But then she says, but he has God, my brain is foggy this morning. But basically says because he has
suicidal.
Right. He's going to kill himself. And it's like, what? Yeah. That's the reasoning? That's the rationale? I mean, it's so bizarre. Yeah, and then you come up with
terrible.
It's a horrible rationale. And then you come up with, all right, we're not gonna extradite him. However, we're just also gonna keep him in jail. What? So it's like, we're not gonna send him.
Unpack there. There's a lot.
It's bizarre.
There's a lot to unpack there, Jamarl. A lot.
So what did you think of that?
So,
I mean, I'm sorry, please.
So we were actually live streaming. We woke up early in the morning to cover that. We were in DC holding on the ground actions for Julian Assange. So we woke up, the Action for Assange crew woke up and we covered that on live stream. And if you watch our live stream, I'm like sitting over in the corner, just angry. Like everything that she was saying just made me angrier and angrier and angrier. And I was fuming. And we all kind of, like, I'm, again, very cynical. So I kind of expected that it was not going to go in a good way for us. So, I was prepared to be angry and mad and all that stuff. And so, there's like this succession of tweets where it's like terrible, terrible, terrible. And then there was, because there were no cameras allowed. So we were just having to cover it based on the live tweets of people, journalists who had the video access. So we're reading these tweets and there's like terrible tweet, terrible tweet, terrible tweet. And then there's a tweet that's like kind of like good, but weird. And then the next tweet is no extradition. And we sat there for at least 4 minutes trying to figure out what that even meant. We had no idea what was going on. That whole day felt very confusing. I still don't really know what happened. But you're right. The ruling was atrocious. She agreed with she basically read the prosecution's case out loud as her ruling and then said, oh, but, he's in a precarious state mentally. So, we can't extradite him, which was interesting because during the trial, they tried to make the case that, U.S. prisons are, almost like it's like a camp. Like there's arts and crafts and, you can, get on the internet and you have a color TV and like, trying to.
She tried to make it as if the U.S. prisons were horrible, horrible rape factories that Assange would not do well in. However, Belmarsh, great facility.
It's terrible.
Yeah. She acted like it was, like you said, it was like a summer camp.
We live in a cartoon, my friend. Like this is, she's saying that this guy's in such a precarious mental condition and he's a suicide risk. And so we can't extradite him to the United States. Well, how do you think that he got in that precarious mental position? Because of being in Belmarsh for 2 years, because of being illegally detained for a decade. I mean, this is not something that just, came out of nowhere. You created this mess. And now you're telling me that you can't extradite him because he's a suicide risk, but you're going to keep him in prison, which only exacerbates that situation. It doesn't make any sense. And it's very clear that this was something that, was decided long ago, and she was just reading her script. And, I don't really know what person could make any logic out of that, decision. It didn't, there is no sense there. There really isn't.
I think it was Jamarl, actually, who on the show, I think maybe some guests signed on to this, or one of the guests brought it up too, but I think, Jamarl, you were the one who said she wanted to stand up in some sense. She didn't want to sign her name onto this. She didn't want to send Assange into that maw. But what she couldn't stand up so fully to the United States establishment. She didn't want to do it on the nose like that. And so she came up with this sort of weird out of left field, like you're talking about, that Assange was a suicide risk because he's autistic and because the prisons in the U.S. are bad. She said on both counts. So I don't know if that's a full explanation, but that at least gives something. I'm not asking you to be a mind reader. Does that make sense, though?
No, I think Misty? Everybody wants to pass the buck. I think everybody wants to. Nobody, like I said, nobody really wants to be responsible for this. So they're just kind of trying to pass it down the line, which is what she did essentially.
And in the process, she is entirely responsible for it. I mean, keeping him in detainment, admittedly better than the alternative of sending him to the U.S., but it's more of this Kafkaesque sort of in limbo, in a constant state of trial mode that he's been in, even though the charges aren't particularly well cleared. It is like Kafka in some sense. Doesn't make sense what's going on. We've got just a couple of minutes left here. What have you been doing? Where can people find you online? It's great to have you this first time. I know you have the Facts on the Ground podcast. What do you folks talk about that there? What's the deal with that, Misty?
So Facts on the Ground is a show that I started with my friend Jesse Zerwell. Basically, we just, I think that right now we're noticing in the media landscape that there are a lot of issues that are not being discussed that should be being discussed. And there's a huge, hole there for people, particularly on the left, to jump in and, kind of try to call some attention to these issues. Assange being one of them. We've also talked about the Israel-Palestine situation. We have a running series on missing and murdered Indigenous women and the epidemic that's happening there. I mean, we've talked to people like Dan Cohen and Max Blumenthal and, just trying to get some of these things that, really need some attention called to them, pushed more to the forefront. I mean, we're a new show. We're just getting started. But, that's kind of the goal of what we're trying to accomplish there. So, that's kind of what that's all about. And then the Action for Assange vigils is obviously a twice-a-week vigil about Julian Assange and his case. And we talk to a lot of amazing guests and cover that in detail so that people can get a gist of exactly how serious and critical this issue is.
Misty, thanks so much for joining us. We're out of time, but I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can get you back soon, too.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
For those listening, that was the voice of Misty Winston, political activist, organizer, and co-host of both the Facts on the Ground podcast and Free Assange Vigils. You can follow Misty on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust and the Facts on the Ground podcast on YouTube and on Twitter at FOTG Podcast. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, and we will be back in a minute talking with Leo Flores. Be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault lines.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are joined now by Leo Flores, political analyst and Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. You can follow him, by the way, on Twitter at Leonardo EFA, as well as check him out on the Code Pink website, codepink.org. Leo, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for being back with us. All right, so a lot has happened in the last weeks. One of the things that hasn't been covered as much, we haven't been talking about as much specifically, is that a little bit over a week ago, Trump and specifically Pompeo added Cuba back to the list of states sponsoring terrorism in a sort of departing move against the administration. Just to bring us up to speed here, what are the details of this? What does this sort of signify and what does it practically mean in the United States relationship with Cuba, which, of course, long strained history there. But Leo, what is this and what's the significance?
Well, this is really kind of the last attack as part of the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign against Cuba. And the significance of it is that, first of all, it cannot be undone on day one of Biden's administration. It's a process that might take up to 2 to 3 months to get Cuba removed from this list. Cuba was on this list until 2015 when the Obama administration removed them. And they removed them because there was absolutely no evidence that Cuba had been involved in sponsoring terror for decades, right? And unfortunately, what this move really means is it's kind of a parting gift to the Miami lobby, the Cuba lobby in Miami from Pompeo and Trump.
Cuba wasn't the only country that Trump did this to on his way out. He did something similar to Iran, correct? I mean, this was basically last few days in office. What can we do to gum up the works for Joe Biden coming into office? Because, like you said, Obama administration pulled Cuba off this list. It's likely that so will Biden do the same thing. So what's the point of this? Is this just antagonism for antagonism's sake? What's the objective of doing this?
Well, I think there's certainly going to be a political price to pay to, restore the Obama era policy towards Cuba, and this kind of raises the price of that. And we saw similar things with regards to Iran, with regards to the designation of the Houthis in Yemen as a terrorist organization. These are all things they're designed to gum up the works in terms of foreign policy for the incoming Biden administration. And crucially, they're also designed, as I mentioned before, to kind of appeal to the base of certain Republican Party, certainly campaign fundraisers. And that's kind of, my theory is that Pompeo is really doing this. He's the one pushing this because he's going to try to position himself for 2024. So he's really appealing not just to the base in Florida, the Cuban American vote, but also to financiers and campaign fundraisers who really want a hard line against Iran, who are super pro-Israel. And so we see a series of moves along that venue.
And here's the thing. We've had you on the show before, and I think the most recent time we had this conversation, you were looking at the incoming Biden administration, trying to read their tea leaves, so to speak, figuring out what they would want from South and Central America and the Caribbean. And you were saying that you thought that they would be a bit softer. Now, I was incredulous. I still am incredulous. But I will admit, we had Scott Ritter on last week. I was reading one of his articles about William Burns, incoming CIA director, who he painted as a more diplomatic figure, less militaristic, and less likely to go for sort of hard power knockouts of other countries and more for the sort of soft power long-term, probably neoliberal-esque influence. Do you still stand for that? I mean, you're talking about Pompeo and the Trump administration trying to gum up the works for the incoming Biden admin. What they would be gumming up there, of course, is some softening of our relationship with these countries, these regions. Do you see them doing that? If so, what do you have to go on there, Leo?
Well, yes and no. I think the Biden camp has really signaled that they're going to take a different line on immigration, for example. So the Trump administration had forced what's called the Northern Triangle countries in Central America, which is Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, into these third safe country agreements, where anyone that wanted asylum in the United States got sent to one of these three countries. Biden is supposedly going to reverse that position, so that's going to be very welcome in Latin America. And of course, we have the whole history of, Biden was basically Obama's point man in Latin America in terms of travel to the region. So, a lot of the leaders in the region know him well, and there's an expectation that they know how to work with him. I would walk it back a little bit in terms of Venezuela because of some news that's come out regarding, say, for example, Biden inviting Juan Guaido's ambassador to the inauguration. So that's a bad sign. But on other fronts, there are more positive developments. And it's not that Biden's going to be good for the region. It's just that the way Trump operated in terms of, military threats and really bullying, I don't think that's going to fly anymore. And so the region's going to have more kind of room to push back on the United States. And I think the United States is going to want to be seen as a more reliable partner. So they're going to look for ways to work with the region rather than work against it.
So I guess the operative question is, what is Biden going to do or expected to do in South America when he takes office? Not just Cuba, but just kind of the region as a whole. What are the expectations from the standpoint of those governments towards Biden? For that matter, what is Cuba's expectation towards Biden? I would imagine, like you said, he's probably going to get him off the list, but that takes time. But all in all, from a policy consideration, what are we to expect with Biden for the countries in this region?
Well, I think at first, the first thing he's going to do is really going to attempt to tackle the issue of migration from Central America to the United States. He's done this in the past by basically throwing money at the problem, by funding more security programs throughout Central America and the Caribbean. It didn't work. It'll be really interesting to see if he learned a lesson in that regard, if he realized that what the people of Central America need is a stronger social safety net rather than neoliberal reforms, rather than more money for policing. It's not clear to me that that's going to happen. So I think that's going to be an ongoing issue for the Biden campus. And it's going to start, from week one. There's a caravan of hundreds of migrants coming north from Guatemala into Mexico. We'll see what happens with these people. But I mean, I have no, expectation that Biden's going to suddenly open the doors, because that's going to be too much of a political price to pay.
We were talking about this, actually. Let's go into that for just a second here. When Mexico's president specifically calling on the Biden administration to change its tune when it comes to immigration policy, the migrants you were talking about in Guatemala, I didn't hear a couple hundred. I heard a couple thousand. I heard approximately 2,000 migrants who were stuck at a roadblock. And while they were throwing rocks at police, the police were responding with tear gas. That's not a good scene. But of course, a lot of this has been instigated by us. Just on that briefly, this recent caravan, what are its precedents? What have we seen over the last couple of years? It seems like things slowed down there for a while. Why was that? And what do you see happening with that caravan? And in general, I mean, you're talking about the Biden incoming administration. You kind of teased at it for a second. What do you think how do you think we'll change, if we will, as a country?
Well, in terms of the caravan, the same sort of similar thing happened early on during the Trump administration. There was a massive caravan of migrants coming through. And what Trump did was he basically forced Mexico's hand. He forced Mexico to enforce its migration policies violently at the southern border. And Mexico came under a lot of criticism for that. There's still a lot of criticism within Latin America of AMLO, the president of Mexico, because of its migration policy. So AMLO's going to play a really kind of key role in attempting to lessen the impact that Mexican security forces have on these poor migrants by getting Biden to change U.S. migration policy. But I think that's going to be an uphill battle, and we'll see what happens. I mean, we should note that López Obrador might have a difficult time with Biden, because the Democrats are very invested in the opposition parties in Mexico. And so really, he might really find a kind of a cold shoulder from the White House to start with. But he's proven to be kind of a savvy politician in terms of handling the White House. He certainly handled the Trump administration very well under very difficult circumstances. But yeah, I mean, it's something that's yet to be determined. We're still kind of reading the tea leaves on that.
Get into the politics of Cuba. Namely, specifically, I should say, the politics of Cuba. What are the people in Cuba, from the standpoint of the public itself, the population, how are they viewing this changeover from Trump to Biden? Meaning, I don't hear much about the politics of the people who are there in Cuba itself. And I'm curious on how they view Trump, but also how they're viewing this transition from Trump to Biden.
I mean, I think in Cuba, there's kind of cautious optimism about the incoming Biden administration. It's clear to them, just like it was clear during the Obama era, that, the United States really, what it wants with the end goal is regime change in Cuba. And it's clear that what's going to change are the strategies. So the Obama administration kind of tried to have this rapprochement with Cuba, or it did have this rapprochement with Cuba, because it wanted to open up its economy. And rather than, pressure the Cuban government by sanctions, it was going to pressure it with basically capitalism. And I think, after 4 years of Trump administration sanctions that have really hit Cuba hard, specifically the Cuban people, and they've hit everything from energy to tourism to health to remittances, been broad sanctions against Cuba. And I think the Cuban people are really kind of going to give the Biden administration a chance to undo all this harm, and then we'll see what happens from there. I think it'll be a positive thing for Cuba. but it's going to take some time, and it's not clear yet that really that Biden's going to take all the necessary steps to just restore the Obama policy, because there are going to be prices to pay, specifically in Congress.
Well, and one other side of this, coming to electoral politics for a minute, if I'm remembering correctly, and I don't think that this was revised after the fact, like the biggest swing demographic, or not swing demographic, but the biggest swing in the demographic of different demographies in America was among Cuban Americans in Florida who voted for Trump. To the tune of like a double-digit swing, I think, from the previous election. It was 15 or 16% looking at it on election night. Now, those might have been revised down. Those are exit polls. I don't know exactly what happened with those. But part of what this brings into the political calculus here is the Biden administration's, I'll just hand it over to you. Do you think that's a significant enough influence that they won't have any choice other than to be, to continue the Trump administration's hardline policies on Cuba? Or do you think they have sort of larger strategic geopolitical goals that they're going to pursue? What do you think the Biden admin is going to do in that respect? What do you think their perspective is on that, Leo?
Well, I certainly do think they're going to work hard to undo some of the worst of the sanctions, because when the Obama era, had this policy of rapprochement, it was widely popular among these Cuban American sectors in Miami. Many of them were very tired of the embargo on Cuba, the blockade on Cuba, and they wanted more engagement to see, what they wanted, change for the better. But, they're kind of front runners, right? So they were supporting the Obama policy. And then, as you said, a huge chunk switched over to Trump and his hardline policy. I think really we're going to see another flip if Biden really tries his policy of rapprochement, if he goes all in for it. If he kind of tries to play both sides, I think he's going to come out losing, because then it'll be clear to this base that the right wing, the Trump approach, has a more kind of concrete idea of what it wants to do. So really, Biden has to take decisive action to move towards a policy of rapprochement. And I think that might have political benefits in Florida, because Obama was did pretty well amongst the Cuban Americans. And I think Biden can recover that.
I remember when Obama came in, and Obama took that policy of basically, let's have an open hand towards Cuba. We're going to try to normalize relations, etc. I could have swore that was a popular policy. So I don't know what happened between Trump and Obama to make that policy, or to make, let's say, the public change on that. We have about a minute and a half left. What went wrong? Can you explain that? Why did the Cuban population all of a sudden change over to Trump with this idea that, yes, this is what we want, when it seemed perfectly open to Obama's, like you said, rapprochement with the country?
Well, I think really the main one, no opposition from Democratic politicians to many of these policies, or what opposition there was very little. And so if you have this kind of opposition party that doesn't offer a clear vision as to what it wants and what it would do for Cuba or for Cuban Americans, then really, the population in question, the Cuban Americans, have really no choice, no other option than go with the people who have a clear vision, who aren't going to be kind of, wishy-washy and flipping around every time as the political winds blow. And so it's exactly that you had one side that's determined in terms of like the Republicans and the hardliners. The other side did nothing to try to stop that. And they kind of tried to ride those coattails and fail.
Just the very fact that they had a policy in and of itself was enough for people to get on. Basically the fastest thing moving. So let's do this. Let's take us out. Leo Flores is a political activist or political analyst and Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. You can follow Leo on Twitter at Leonardo EFA, and as well on Code Pink website, codepink.org. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for our last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news and events across our country as well as across our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together on that wall, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This brings up an interesting note. I know back in the day, months ago, feels like years ago, I was kind of making jokes about, am I on that wall with you? Or isn't the whole audience on the wall with you / us potentially, Jamarl? What's your take on that?
On some level, yeah. I mean, when I say on the wall, I just mean, look, people, anywhere you are is where you're at. Meaning the idea of ideology. Everybody places their stake in the ground somewhere. And there are going to be people, because you're awash in all sorts of ideas and everything else, that push back against it, both directions. And so it's like, on some level, you're on the wall trying to guard whatever it is that you believe in. That's why I use the wall concept, because I think it works. It's like, here are a thing of ideas that you try to stand for. You have your stake in the ground in those things, you try to defend it. There are times where you lose, but you should lose, because your thought might be wrong. But either way, you defend it until the person forces you to lose that battle. That's the way I look at it. But yeah, you're right. The audience is there because all of us are there together, holding that wall.
There we go. I'm just trying to be inclusive here. Let's just go into the headlines. I could talk more about the wall, but enough talking about walls for now. In COVID news, at least 1,440 new coronavirus deaths and 142,588 new cases were reported in the U.S. yesterday, January 18th. Over the past week, there has been an average of 207,495 cases per day. That's a decrease of 7% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 24,126,000 people in the U.S. have been infected with the coronavirus, and just over 399,000 have died. We're not that far away. I'm just going to say it. I was looking into this a little earlier. We're not that far away from passing over 100 million infections globally. Right now, we are at, 90 plus, I think 91, somewhere between 91 and 93 million, something like that. We're getting pretty close there. That's a pretty, earlier on last year, the phrase grim milestone, I remember Lee making this joke when he was on the show. He kept using the phrase because the news media kept using the phrase because every day back in March and April, there was a new grim milestone. That will indeed be a grim milestone. Over 100 million cases. It's close to 1/70th, 1/80th of the global population. Admittedly, still a pretty small ratio if you're just going to look at it in terms of numbers. But as that ratio changes, as more and more people get infected, it's not going to be a pretty picture. Already isn't a pretty picture. Hasn't been for a long time, frankly. Anyway, going back to the headlines here, there's a new mask in town. German authorities may make wearing FFP2 masks, face masks, which filter over 90% of airborne particles, mandatory when people are out in public. This would be in a bid to contain the spread of the new coronavirus and its new mutations. The southeastern state of Bavaria and the country of Austria have already made it mandatory to wear the FFP2 face masks when outside. Another side of this, I might just be in weird circles, but in some of the circles that I'm in, on their fringes, admittedly, so on the outer fringes of some circles, it's a weird mental image, but there you go. I've heard people talking about wearing positive pressure suits. You know what I'm talking about? Not like flight suits, but like the hazmat containment suits.
Right.
Admittedly kind of extreme. Admittedly pretty extreme. But
like
and that would certainly be a sight. Exactly, like walking around, in a sort of clothing bubble. I think that might be going a bit too far for most folks, especially because they're expensive. They're like hundreds or I think thousands of dollars, a couple $1,000 to buy one.
Most of those masks. I mean, because if you get to a point where the government is like, look, this is bad, like what number, like how many people dead does it take for the government to say, all right, people need to start wearing this mask? Like we have 400,000. We're almost at 400,000. If that number was 1 million, would that be enough for the mask? When do you get to the point where that mask is policy?
It could be. Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing. The people who are talking about like depleted oxygen when it came to people wearing bandanas on their faces, they're going to get more and more. Admittedly, they've been kind of more quiet recently. They're going to get more and more vocal the more the masks are doing the containing. So the FFP2s, that's a 90% sort of transpiration rate, something like that. It blocks 90% of incoming particles. Remembering the P95s are like 95%. And then I forget what these ones are called, but you have people wearing full-on masks. Don't know how else to put it, like with 2 filters on either side. Those have names. I'm forgetting what it is. And those are closer to 100, like 99% plus containment. So there are a variety of masks. There's a sort of scale that you can incrementally move upon by changing masks and recommending different types of masks. But here's another thing, man. Like, if you're going to do that, shouldn't you have done it hard and early? Shouldn't you have recommended that people wear the 95% plus the P95s back in the day? Like, wouldn't have that been the order? Because if you could have done that, then you could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating for that. I'm just saying, from a public policy or a health policy perspective, that seems non-self-contradictory. That seems perfectly consistent. If you want to shut it down at the beginning, if you're going to do travel lockdowns and a wider economic lockdown, don't you pull out all the stops and do it then? Does that make sense, Jamarl?
It does make sense, but people tend to escalate. Like, they don't tend to drop or go to maximum immediately. It tends to be this kind of escalation in regards to what you do, because anything that you do requires work. I mean, it requires some level of labor, some level of policy, some contraption, something. And the operative question is...
China did.
Well, yeah, but China's a communist country. Who's going to pay for that stuff? Like, if they come out and say, okay, we need this mask, who's going to pay for that? Half the country can't afford it.
I've been wondering, are they communist or are they more capitalist than the United States? They might be both more capitalist and more socialistic.
I think they're more capitalist, personally. But what does that mean in the context? I mean, capitalists get beheaded in that country. So, but look, man, China is a fascinating case to me, because it seems like they put a rope around capitalism and it's like, all right, go. We're going to get the benefits. We're trying to hold off the negative aspects of it. It's like the communists come and say.
And I hear you. Sorry for interrupting. To be clear, when you say beheaded, I'm pretty sure you're talking about Jack Ma, and you're talking about a figurative beheading.
I'm talking about. I'm just saying, in that country, there have been cases where they have executed. I mean, when you've gone too far off that ledge. I mean, the stuff that takes place in the United States would not get away with in China. I mean, that's what I mean by that. Like, they don't, it's a communist country. It's not a capitalist country. And I know some people like to point to, because they were able to basically use capitalism better than, some of the capitalist countries. But I don't think I'm wrong on that. I mean, I can be fact-checked, but if I'm not mistaken, that there have been various people who are in the capitalist sector in that country that have come to bad ends because of the things that they were doing in that country.
I would not be surprised by that. I don't know about that, but I would not be surprised by that. But we can come back to that. Yeah. That would be an interesting topic for a future conversation on that.
I'll fact check myself to make sure I'm right on that. But I'm just making the point that it is definitely it is not a capitalist country, but they are able to get the benefits of it. I mean, they've raised how many people out of poverty? It's like the overwhelming majority of the population. I think it might be 1% of the country left in poverty. And we're talking about a country of 1.5 billion people. It's astonishingly the number of people in that country that they were able to raise out of poverty. It is not capitalism, but it is some weird, we're going to put a rope around it. I'm going to ride this thing to get the benefits out of it without letting it take over the country. They're trying to get the best of it without the worst.
I can see it. All right, you know what? Let's go into more headlines here. Still on COVID news, Trump's White House announced yesterday that the entry ban would end on January 26th. That ban has included restrictions on travel from the UK, mostly out of the EU, and from Brazil. Biden's spokeswoman, however, immediately tweeted, quote, "On the advice of our medical team, the administration does not intend to lift these restrictions. In fact, we plan to strengthen public health measures around international travel in order to further mitigate the spread of COVID-19. End quote. Another line of conflict between the two administrations, the one going out, the other coming in. Washington State has planned a public-private partnership between the health department and other business, healthcare, and labor leaders to boost the state's COVID-19 vaccinations. Kaiser Permanente will help plan for mass vaccinations, while Starbucks will help with operational efficiency, and Microsoft will provide the technology expertise. In national political news, President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration is tomorrow, and U.S. agencies are on their toes. It's a good mental image, U.S. agencies on their toes. The Washington Post reported on an FBI intelligence report that summarized a plan by QAnon members to infiltrate the inauguration by posing as U.S. National Guard soldiers. Last week, acting chief of the Metropolitan Police Department said that more than 20,000 soldiers from the National Guard will be on hand in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration. The Pentagon has already called on the FBI to vet National Guard troops in D.C. amid allegations participants in the January 6th Capitol siege could have been helped by those assigned to protect the buildings for the inauguration. In addition to monitoring for lone wolves and insider threats, the FBI is also bracing for armed protests planned in all 50 state capitals across the country on Inauguration Day tomorrow. And on the insurrection thingy that happened a couple of weeks ago, don't mean to put it so informally, it was deadly after all, but don't know exactly what to call it. An alleged Capitol rioter, Riley Williams, has been accused of being the recorded woman stealing Nancy Pelosi's laptop or hard drive. Her former partner turned her in, saying that she planned to give it to someone to sell it to Russia's foreign intelligence service, but the plan fell through. She surrendered herself to authorities last night. Apparently didn't have very good OPSEC. She was trying to sell a congresswoman's, private information. One could make the argument that some of that information is public too, at least should be. But she was planning to sell it to Russia's foreign intelligence service. But apparently told her partner, former partner, an ex. Anyway, there is a lot to talk about there. But more headlines here. Reports are coming out that Trump will issue up to 100 pardons or commutations before he leaves office on the 20th. Apparently, the list will be announced tomorrow. Assange activist Pamela Anderson has made a final appeal to Trump, urging him to, quote, do the right thing, end quote, and pardon WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. In international news, Mexico's president has made an appeal to the incoming Biden administration, requesting that the United States change its immigration policy. These comments come as thousands of migrants clashed with police in Guatemala after police set up a roadblock to prevent them from heading further north. We were talking about this with Leo Flores in the last segment, so go back and check that out in the 8:45 segment Eastern Time. Brazil's government has begun distributing thousands of doses of China's coronavirus vaccine. The country's inoculation program began yesterday, 2 days early. On Sunday, Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny was detained after returning to Russia from Germany, where he was being treated after an alleged nerve agent poisoning. And in Uganda, incumbent President Yoweri Museveni won re-election for a sixth term, reportedly with 58.64% of the vote, while opposition candidate singer Bobby Wine got 34.83% of the vote. Wine and his National Unity Platform announced they were planning to file a lawsuit claiming the election was rigged. However, the military has reportedly blocked the party's offices in the capital and surrounded Wine's personal home. Ugandan authorities are accusing the United States of meddling in the election after U.S. Ambassador Natalie Brown attempted to visit Wine, who again is currently under house arrest. In tech news, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit organization called the Coalition for a Safer Web says that it advocates for new technologies and policies to remove extremist content from social media. That group is headed by former U.S. Ambassador to Morocco, Mark Ginsburg. The group filed a lawsuit against Apple, urging it to remove the Telegram messenger from its app store, which, according to its filing, is, quote, being used to intimidate, threaten, and coerce members of the public, end quote. The case also accuses Telegram of being a, quote, tool to facilitate and carry out its terrorist activity, including the attack on the U.S. Capitol, end quote. Apparently, a similar lawsuit is planned against Google. You got to have eyes everywhere. This is the whole panopticon thing, and I don't mean to make too much out of this, but incrementally, eyes are on more and more. Patriot Act 1.0, which we were talking about earlier on with George Samueli, the first interview of the show back at 7:30 Eastern. He was talking about the advent, the incoming Patriot Act 2.0, which would be a sort of progressive, metastasized version of it for different sectors of our society. It wouldn't be one bill. It would be different sectors of our government coming together in different cases to crack down on speech. That's going to be a big topic of conversation in the coming years. I'll just put it like that. The problem is, if it's a big topic of conversation and the avenues for having independent conversations about it, the Twitters of the world, if there's what they're going to do, this is going to be an interesting story to watch. They're going to suppress certain types of conversation on this conversation, if that makes sense. In the same way that Facebook blocked Ron Paul from posting to his personal Facebook page. Didn't block his account, they blocked him from posting to it after he wrote an article on his website and shared it on Facebook, criticizing Facebook for censoring, and then got censored himself. I'm sure the same thing is going to happen again. The way that we talk about this is going to be controlled. and people who are worried about it and start to talk about it online about how, different moves are acts of censorship and they're worried about it, that's going to be called fake news and that's going to get censored. And that is, it's scary. I'll put it like that. It's not good for our society. A couple more quick headlines here. Parlor has returned online following its ejection from the internet. The social media website has not regained full operability, but says they will by the end of January. If you go over to a Parlor, on the front page right now, it's just a message, basically. It's a couple of posts from the platform and effectively a message from the organization saying they hope to bring the site back online soon. They were kicked off of Google and Apple's app stores and then kicked off of their hosting by Amazon. Amazon Web Services shut them down because, reportedly they were hosting extremist content and helping people to organize for the assaults on the Capitol, that kind of thing. But they're not back online fully yet. They plan to be back on soon. This is being called, it's what it said, this is how the media has been reporting it. It said that they're hosted through a sort of a Russian-based internet hosting platform. If you go to and check out Epic, I think it's because Epic is using Russian services or something like that, but the company that they're using for their hosting, Epic, is based out of Washington. So there are a couple of levels of complication here. Anyway, one quick last headline. Turkey has placed advertising bans on Twitter, Periscope, and Pinterest over their non-compliance with a controversial new law that requires social media platforms to appoint legal representatives in the country. We were talking earlier about nationally, internationally, how these apps go, how big tech companies and the American government, frankly, confront other countries' needs, demands for some semblance of freedom of speech in their own countries. That's it. That's also going to be a big story going forward. Anyway, those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And I have spent too long on headlines here, but I appreciate our next guest. He's Caleb Maupin. We'll be back with him in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and our guest, Caleb Maupin. He is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. And by the way, you can and should follow Caleb on Twitter at Caleb Maupin and read his articles at calebmaupin.com. I'm actually going to start with Parlor, Caleb. I'm curious to hear your take on this. You're on Twitter, of course. You got an active and substantial following over there. So you're a resident of that platform, but I'm sure that you, like many of us, are also concerned about the U.S. government and big tech companies' successful attempts so far to crack down on a true variety of speech when it comes to political issues and the news, with Parlor getting banned, getting blocked, and now them making a resurgence. I'm just turning it over to you, Caleb. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hate to be cynical, but, it's all dressed up in politics. Like, this is this righteous move on their part. The big tech giants, they're just morally outraged by what happened on Capitol Hill. And they just have to shut down Parlor. But I'm sorry, if McDonald's, had to shut down a rival hamburger company, and they said, oh, it's because that company supports Donald Trump and everyone just needs to buy their hamburgers from us because this other company is just morally bad. Would we buy this? I mean, this just seems like cracking down on your competitor. This seems like, securing your monopoly to me. That's what it seems like. I really, really have a hard time buying that this is just some bold political move. I think the nightmare of Twitter and the nightmare of Facebook and the nightmare of YouTube and Google and is what's going to happen anyway, which is eventually they're going to lose their monopoly. Eventually, people are going to, use other social media outlets, and they won't have an absolute monopoly, and that's going to happen, and they know that, and it's only a matter of time. So, yes, they want to dress it up as this political statement, and they're taking a stand, but at the end of the day, what are they doing? They're shutting down a potential rival and competitor at a moment when more and more people are getting sick and tired of the censorship and the way they treated the Hunter Biden story and suppressed it, the way that they're blatantly partisan in American politics, the way that so many people are being shut off. It looks to me like they're realizing that it's only a matter of time before their monopoly goes.
See, I don't know if they know that. I mean, look, I agree with you that this does come across as looking at it as you're shutting down a competitor. By the same token, the argument that is being made is that the competitor is basically harboring a lot of people that were there to foment that strike, to foment that attack. I got to be honest, that attack could have been fomented on Facebook, Twitter, Google. It could have been using any of these platforms to make that attack, unless all of the platforms, including private communications, are being monitored. Now, that's a whole nother jump at the shark. Meaning, shutting down Parlor is one thing, but to pretend as if people aren't going to communicate using whatever platform they can get their hands on for the communication, it will require mass surveillance pretty much at all times, even in instances of private communications. And I don't buy for a moment that Google, Twitter, Facebook are going to be held to the standard to which they set for Parlor. What do you think about that? I mean, I don't buy this idea that Parlor is the only application that it can be used for something like this. And because I don't buy it, that it's the only, that this is the only thing that can be used for, that you have all of these other applications that can be used for it also, then it seems that the goal is trying to, let's say, mitigate conversation that may run afoul of the political institutions that we currently have. Now, what do you think about that? I mean, it's not just Parlor, which is kind of my point. And if you're going to shut it down, you got to shut all of it down.
Yeah, right. And I mean, there were people who participated in Trump's big rally that were on Facebook. There were people participating in that rally on Twitter. And I mean, the idea that app is responsible for it. I mean, that app perhaps was less willing to censor pro-Trump views, and I think that's why a lot of Trump folks were using it. But the idea that app is somehow responsible for what happened on Capitol Hill because of what I don't buy that. I just don't buy it. And it seems like a lot of moral grandstanding. And at the end of the day, I compare this to the printing press. When the Catholic Church, started using the printing press in Europe, right? Johannes Gutenberg. At first, the Catholic Church thought it was great. They got the printing press. We could print, every village can have their little village Bible. We can print our indulgences. It was great. But it was only a matter of time before critics of the Catholic Church got their hands on the printing press. And that was a big turning point. And, this is how it works. You can talk about it in business. It works this way, too. If a company develops a competitive, technological breakthrough that puts them ahead, give it time, all their competitors will catch up with them. It's only a matter of time. And I think it is only a matter of time before there are rivals. Look, the reason that there was such a freak out about TikTok was just, oh, my goodness. There was just a freak out about it was because here is an app. Here's a social media platform that people all across the United States are using that didn't originate in Silicon Valley. It originated in China. And even though, they made it not available on the Chinese mainland so that it wouldn't be subject to censorship, even though they made a point of allowing all kinds of anti-Chinese stuff, you can find all kinds of stuff about Hong Kong protesters and Uyghurs all over TikTok. Didn't matter. They freaked out about TikTok. And the reason they freaked out is because they don't control it. It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time before alternatives to Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google are out there that are originating from forces other than Silicon Valley. It sounds wacky, it sounds tinfoil hatty, but it is a matter of public record that the reason that the United States excelled in the computer revolution was because of strategic decisions from American intelligence. They realized this was something we had the resources to invest in. The Soviet Union did not, and the NSA and the CIA and other intelligence agencies gave lots of loans and money to IBM and Apple and the companies that eventually, set up Google and other things. And the Silicon Valley explosion wasn't a result of the free market. Al Gore very famously said, we invented the internet, and everyone kind of laughed at him. But what he was pointing to was that there was a strategic decision by the American government to allocate resources to allow the United States to be the leader of the computer revolution. And this goes all the way back to Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Cold War strategist. He wrote a book about the technotronic era and how, increasingly those who control the means of communication would be able to craft and socially engineer and control the world. And it's largely understood that the computer revolution was a result of Cold War strategy and the military, and we need to just remember this. And it's only a matter of time before the technology that was innovated by the United States and the West is in the hands of other forces as well.
And this is, the book that you're talking about, the Technotronic Era, haven't read it, but I've heard about it. This was published in 1970, the year after the formation of ARPANET. You were talking about, the intelligence communities, not just infiltration, but active support from the very beginnings of the internet. ARPANET founded in 1969, so the year before that was founded. Again, ARPANET coming from the Advanced Research Projects Agency. Probably familiar, most of the listeners, with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's also, of course, IARPA, the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Agency. So the roots, the common roots there are very deep. And for many who followed this for years are disquieting. We could talk about that for a long time. There are two other topics of conversation I wanted to bring up. One is AOC, also calling for censorship. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez basically calling for the creation of some review process or some long-term sea change in American media policy, trying to affect what publications are able to say. Basically, the rhetoric around this right now, the speech is you're trying to cut down on misinformation or disinformation. The substance or the actuality would be more censorship of competing stories. And I'm guessing that partly, I was saying this earlier on in the show, partly this is aimed at the New York Post and their publication of a lot of the revelations on the Hunter Biden story back during the election cycle last year. I want to come back to that, though. Why do you think, Caleb, it seems to me that in the last half decade, there has been a deep change in the American sort of public conscience, where with Snowden and with Assange, the revelations happening early in the 2010s, a lot of the public was worried about the NSA. They were very cautious of using Facebook and other social media platforms that were, sort of in the making, still fairly young at the time. And they were very concerned about their data being accessed, being breached. It was kind of an iconic moment at the time. I remember a lot of folks being very worried about this. It seems like that conversation has died down. And what it has been replaced by, at least in terms of how the news media is talking about this, are fears of white supremacists and terrorists using these platforms to plan more political, militaristic events online. Now, admittedly, some of this is very recent. This is after the breaching of the Capitol, but it seems like that balance of conversation has shifted, and we've forgotten about the Snowden revelations in large part, or at least gotten used to them. Caleb, why do you think that is? Am I right there? Am I wrong? What's your take on that? Why do you think that's happened? If you admit that it has, if you think that it has, Caleb.
Well, I think that if you listen to mainstream outlets, that's the way the conversation has certainly changed. And I think that the reason for that would be probably that, in American politics, the divisions have gotten more intense, and that what was originally kind of a nonpartisan issue, you had people on the left, people on the right who were concerned about Edward Snowden's revelations and privacy, has now turned into a partisan issue, right? If people say WikiLeaks, immediately you say, people immediately think of, interfering in U.S. elections, Assange, Russia, and they've turned it into a partisan issue. So most people on the liberal camp, immediately you say WikiLeaks, they immediately have a prepared script in their mind. They have a thought-stopping ritual they engage in that says, this is bad, this is Trump stuff, don't talk about this, you must be a Trumper. Whereas, people on the right, they get a little confused because the right tends to be the home of, more authoritarian stuff, more support for the military industrial complex and more support for U.S. interventionism and such. And you have more of a military mindset. You have got Mike Pompeo and others, but yet it's on the right, on the dissident right, that you have some sympathy. So there are divisions on the right, divisions on the left, but unfortunately, as things become a partisan issue, people are less willing to think with a clear head, and they start rooting for whichever team is theirs and waving their team's flag, and it's a little bit disappointing.
You're right. You know what? We got to go into a break, but you're exactly right, I think. And I think a lot of this has to do with what happened in 2016 and the conversation around fake news and the cultural self-consciousness that, admittedly not fully self-conscious, but we came to think of ourselves as more and more being in these two divided camps. And I think that crowded out, that way of approaching the internet and that way of approaching the conversation online crowded out the Snowden revelations. And admittedly a couple of years old at that point, but still it was recent enough that if that hadn't happened, we might have been thinking in those terms more now. And sadly, I don't think we are. Anyway, we need to go into a break. We're joined by Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. Follow him on Twitter at Caleb Maupin. Read his articles at calebmaupin.com. We will be back with him on the other side of this break in just a minute.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us is Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts the rise of prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Again, Caleb, welcome to the show, man.
Sure, glad to be here as always.
So one of the questions I wanted to get into that I thought was really interesting, you made a video that was basically a message to Trump supporters from a communist. What is the message that you wanted to impart to Trump supporters, and why?
Well, I said, look, I don't hate you. I disagree with you on a number of key points, but I think we're all really angry about what's happening in the country and the power of big corporations and monopolies. And I'd like you to examine what genuine socialism is really about with a clear head, because we're all upset. And that was generally my message to Trump supporters. And it got quite a strong reaction. A number of Trump supporters actually did watch it. It made its way through a number of Trump supporting and QAnon supporting websites. And on top of that, it got quite a reaction from the left. Many leftists thought it was quite brave of me to do, and I was expecting quite a negative reaction to it. But instead, I got many leftists who said it was a brilliantly done thing. Many people messaged me and they said, I sent this to my Trump supporting relatives. I sent this to my cousins. I sent this to my mom and dad, my brother, my uncle. And that a lot of leftists said, thank goodness you're starting this conversation, and thank goodness you have made a video introducing Marxism. And disagreeing and challenging Trump supporters, not in an accusatory and hostile way, but in a way of understanding how angry they are about a lot of the problems in the country that those of us on the left are also mad about. And so I've gotten a very, very positive reaction to it, I would say, overall. Obviously, a lot of disagreement from all sides. A lot of leftists thought I was too soft on the Trump supporters. I should be scolding them more. A lot of Trump supporters said, well, you might be friendly here, but you're still a dirty, rotten communist. But overall, I got a pretty positive reaction. I'm glad I did it.
Okay, so I took completely in favor of the parties reaching across lines, but I'm going to bring this up. Isn't the last time, at least on the sort of international public memory, isn't the last time that we saw the right wing embracing socialism? You know where I'm going with this. Wasn't that in the 20s and 30s with the rise of the National Socialist Party in Germany? Wasn't that with the rise of the Nazis? I mean, admittedly, that's an obvious response to bring up. But Caleb, I'm curious about how you would respond to that. Aren't you worried about courting that kind of approach?
Well, no. I mean, in my video, I made very clear that I am for the rights of immigrant workers. I talked about Black Lives Matter and my support for that. I talked about a number of issues where I disagree with folks, and I certainly would not be in favor of pandering to racism or ethnic bigotry or national chauvinism or anything like that. But actually, when you talk about that, what's interesting is that on the right in Europe, not in the United States, but historically in Europe, there has been a long history of criticizing capitalism from the right. And actually, right-wing anti-capitalism, I would say, predates left-wing anti-capitalism. Before capitalism had really even gotten going, you already had the Catholic Church condemning it on some level, saying it was a threat to the traditional feudal hierarchies and such, and that a right-wing critique of capitalism certainly didn't start in the 1930s with the Nazis. I mean, it really goes back. You talk about Oswald Spengler. You can talk about Julius Evola. And that and there is Ernst Juncker, and that there was a right-wing traditionalist, ultra-authoritarian critique of capitalism. That's been around for a long time, and that's not what I was putting forward in my video at all. I mean, I advocate an egalitarian society with equal rights for everyone. But right-wing anti-capitalism, I mean, it's something it's worth looking into, right? I mean, in the United States, we think of right-wing and capitalism as being synonymous. There are a lot of thinkers throughout history who have said that, hey, if we're trying to reinforce tradition and hierarchy and obedience and authority and religion and morality, maybe we should question a society where kind of money comes first and everyone can just start a business as they want and rules and structure are put aside. And right-wing anti-capitalism is a long-standing trend. And oddly, I think the Nazis on some level broke with it, even though they called themselves National Socialists. If you looked at Nazi Germany, it was a pretty free market economy. Before coming to power, Hitler sat down with Hallemer Schacht and the Krupps and the Tysons and all the wealthy families and made a deal with them. And then there was the infamous Night of the Long Knives, where he took out the more anti-capitalist wing of his party and killed them all, right? I mean, and you had the execution of Ernst Röhm and Gregor Strasser, and the more fanatical wing of the Nazi party was exterminated. So I don't think the Nazis were really anti-capitalist when it comes down to it. But that's a complex question, and it kind of shows how limited discourse is in the United States.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Caleb, because that is something that some people think, that just because they put socialist in the name, that all of a sudden these guys were socialists. It became very clear that any level of socialism that Hitler was talking about was basically not socialism. I mean, you require, like, if you're going to say, all right, we're going to get rid of a large part of the population and then we're going to become socialists, they missed the boat. You know what I mean? It's not built around this notion of person and physical features. Is built around this notion of class. Hitler entirely missed that point, or didn't care about that point. Caleb, from the standpoint of his supporters, what were you trying to communicate to them from the standpoint of anger? That the left does get this kind of righteous indignation that is within the population. But what is the disconnect between the anger that the left feel versus the anger that the right feel? And is there a disconnect between those two things at all? Meaning, on the day that the Proud Boys are fighting Antifa activists in the public, 4,400 people died from COVID. That seems like the most weirdest and the most bizarre. Like if you're watching Star Wars, for example, and you have Luke fighting Darth Vader, or not Luke fighting Darth Vader, you have Darth Vader, or the person who's becoming Darth Vader having a fight with, I can't think of his name, the guy who eventually trains Luke Skywalker. And they're in the middle of a lava pit, and there's fire going all around them, and these two are fighting as if nothing else is going on. And it's like the world is burning around you, and you guys are still fighting. That's what it felt like. You had, but less significant, more insignificant. Basically, 4,400 people dropped dead from COVID while these two groups are out there fighting. It seems like they miss the point. What is your way of trying to communicate to them to say, look, the anger is not just held by you. There's a large part of the population that is angry and pissed off. And how do you mend the two? What was your pathway of trying to reach out?
Well, when it gets down to it, populism has always been of the left, right? I mean, what does the Communist Manifesto say? I mean, it's the ideas, the working class, the majority of society taking control of the major means of production and organizing them to serve public good. It's an idea of the people rising up against the wealthy elite and restructuring the economy to serve the interests of the people, not the profits of private owners. This is the original populism. It is the broad masses of people against the elite. I mean, left-wing populism is populism. However, unfortunately, there has been a huge amount of confusion in the United States, most especially since the beginning of the Cold War. And left-wing politics, for some, and for a lot of the voices that dominate left-wing politics, has become about protecting intellectuals from the inferior rabble or something like that. Meanwhile, it's been the right that has usurped and pretended to be the populists. But at the end of the day, the economic policies put forward by our right wing here in the United States are economic policies of neoliberalism, cutbacks, looting middle America, destroying the lives of working families. And when it really gets down to it, it is, the economic policies of class struggle and socialism and Eugene Debs and Gus Hall and William C. Foster and the folks who built the labor movement and the folks who struggled to defeat the slave owners and its populism is really on the left. And that's what I was trying to get across. And I see on the left, this kind of reinvention of leftism to be about liberals and intellectuals and the middle class. And then I see the right, pretending to be the populists when at the end of the day, their economic policies are devastating for middle America and for the broad majority while protecting the ultra-rich. So I wanted to make a populist appeal to working class people who might support Donald Trump on the basis that the mainstream media is against him and he's fighting. They see him as fighting for the little guy, even though he's not.
I mean, okay. So one quick thing, we got to go out here, but manufacturing specifically, I've heard you talk about this. I know this is on your mind, increasing general productive capacities. And of course, that's a larger part of the communist platform in general. But it seems like the right, you're talking about usurpation. I don't know if I would put it in those terms, but I get where you're going with that. Isn't the right, don't they sort of own that side of the conversation, bringing manufacturing back to the States, admittedly with some racist overtones, but still this idea of increasing capital production at home? Caleb, I'm just curious about your take on that. How do you see the left possibly taking that bit of rhetoric or that general approach back? Do you see that happening, Caleb?
Well, the AFL-CIO and the labor movement have long been against NAFTA and the trade deals, and against the World Trade Organization and against the internationalization of the economy and globalization in a way that devastates American jobs and creates a global race to the bottom where workers in manufacturing are competing with workers all over the world for who will work for the lowest wages, who will be the most productive and get the least in return. I think there's a long history of the left, opposing that and critiquing that. I'm sure the right has opposed it for different reasons and, thinks it's communism or something. But I don't think that the right wing necessarily owns it. Perhaps they own it in a nativist way. They own the nationalistic rhetoric that says the UN is a communist conspiracy or something like that. But when it gets down to it, it is organized labor. It is the left that has been critical of these trade deals and critical of the internationalization of the economy in this way. So I think it's more complex. And one thing, though, I will say is that, the ultra-rich The folks that very much want a global, open international system, as Anne-Marie Slaughter of the Hillary Clinton State Department put it, those folks often will dress up their advocacy of policies that are devastating middle America and destroying the lives of working families in socially liberal language. They'll say we're building a more culturally inclusive world. This is about breaking down barriers and opposing racism and sexism and being more enlightened in our global community. And that the language of social liberalism has very much been hijacked. At this point, you've got some of the wealthiest families in the world really pushing for quote unquote inclusive capitalism. That's been a big push we're seeing by some of the wealthiest, and the Rockefellers and the Trilateral Commission and some of the ultra rich certainly have hijacked the language of social liberalism to push their agenda of globalization. So I can understand why people may be confused.
It's a kind of ideological divide and conquer tactic. We need to talk about that more some other time. We're out of time now, though. Caleb, thank you for joining us.
Sure thing.
We're joined for these last two segments by Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author, whose new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Check him out on Twitter at Caleb Maupin and read his articles at calebmaupin.com. We're going into a break. We're taking calls on the other side of this break. 202-521-1320. Be back with you on the other side in just a moment.
Fault lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are now in the wrap segment where we try to take today's contents, wrap them up, and put a pretty bow on them. Okay, not quite, but we do take calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. Feel free to call in. We have room for some more, but we have Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on, man?
Dave, the time to act is now. Okay, I got 3 comments I gotta make. Let me finish, everyone. Please let me finish. I'm talking to Trump. Okay. An article came out today by Reuters. A woman in Thailand was sentenced to 43 years in prison for assaulting the monarchy, 29 counts. Keep that in mind. She's 65 years old. Second article. Reuters came out in November talking about the Q9 thing was probably an FBI psyop. Okay? So I shared that link with y'all today. My last but most important comment today. Mr. President Trump, and the people around him, everybody listening, you have to put in Julian Assange because it's more than just about Julian Assange. It's about all of us. Okay? You have to declassify COINTELPRO, MK Ultra, and the John F. Kennedy assassination, other assassination. If you don't do these things, what's going to happen is these people become more and more emboldened. They're already going after Parlor. They're trying to go after Gab. They got rid of Status Quo, which is Jordan on Sheridan channel, off of YouTube. I don't know if he got it back up yet, which he's a lefty. Okay? They're going after Telegram now, their service. They're going after everybody, deplanting people left and right. They're doing it on the right and left. If you don't do it as president, it will become so hard. Even they will try to push out Sputnik News, RT, and they go even to the point where TYT, where the MSM will have no competitors anymore on YouTube and other platforms. There's more than just about Julian Assange. He's important. He's importance, man, but declassify everything else. Because if you don't do it, man, I'm telling you, it will get worse. And when you do it, if you do it, we got your back. Even people don't like you, got your back. I would donate money to you, your legal defense, you buy your merchandise, because this is important. Of course, they're gonna come after you. That's what they want to. But because you have so many people going to raise up and support you, there's going to be political suicide even for the DNC to come after you. Because people on the left going to say, at least he important genocide and declass a whole bunch of things. You have to do this, man. Do not be afraid of the D state, Mr. President Trump. Please declassify everything. Intel Pro, MK Ultra, Martin Luther King assassination, all that, and John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and also important genocides and other people, Snowden and everybody else. I'm telling you, if you do this, we got your back. They're going to come after you, but we got your back. We have no choice, man. The time to act is now, man. Get rid of General Haspel that's holding up the D-class and Christopher Wade, if he's doing it too. That's all I got to say, y'all. The time to act is now.
Tarif, thank you for the call. I agree with you, but I'm sad to say I'm still cynical. If you look at, again, Pompeo, former CIA director under Trump put him in, now Secretary of State, has called, when he was CIA director, called WikiLeaks a hostile foreign intelligence service. So I don't, if that's the voice in his ear, if whatever better instincts he has are constantly being countered and kept at bay by members of his administration that he chose to put in, I don't see him doing it. I'm not hopeful. I think you're right. I think if he were to do that, there would be a surprising rally of support from a variety of political figures. But whether their support would be public or not, that's the thing, man. I don't know. I think he has damned himself with a lot of the stuff he's done. So even if he were to do that, he might get some muted applause, but it would be muted. Anyway, Tarif, I want to just say thank you for the call. I appreciate it, and I agree with your tenor. We have Teodros Fikramariam, Teddy Fikre, probably better known as a frequent guest and friend of the show, calling in from Virginia. Teddy, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, what's going on, Shane and Jamal? Thanks for having me. So I'm actually calling in with respect to an event or a campaign that we're organizing for tomorrow. It's called Wildcat Strike USA 2021. We're working with a bunch of organizers. As of now, 10 organizers, a couple in California, a couple in Texas, of course here in Virginia, I think one in Texas and one in Florida. And so what we're trying to do is basically tell or implore workers across America to take a day off, to call in sick, and if you're really tired of your job, to quit on tomorrow. And I've also been reaching out to hundreds of truckers up and down 95 and 395. I've been going to truck stops, handing out the index card that has the information of the Wildcat Strike USA 2021 on it. So this is our chance, one of our last chances that we have to get our voices heard. While the political class, I call them public serpents, are literally celebrating in D.C. tomorrow. As much as they say that there's supposed to be this security threat, if you saw some of the pictures that are coming out of D.C. in terms of the pomp and circumstances of tomorrow, it's amazing. From the White House to all the way to Congress on the National Mall, they've installed a bunch of American flag lights, I guess. I don't know how many millions that would cost. So this does not sound like a nation or a country that's an imminent threat of some type of an insurrection. What they've effectively done is booted out people and reserved our nation's capital for their plutocracy. This is antithesis of what this country was founded upon. And sadly, America, it happened a long time ago, has reverted to the very same tyranny that gave birth to it. Shane, last time I was on the show with you, you said revolutions are effectively bankrupt because they end up reverting to and actually amplifying the very same despotism that gave rise to them, which I agree. And America is a classic example of that. But this is not a revolution, a violent revolution that I'm speaking of or speaking on behalf of. It's a nonviolent movement for us to just effectively just take a day off, and by doing so, by collective action, to shut commerce down. And when we do that, then they pay attention, because the only thing the rich and powerful care about is their money. You touch their money, they pay attention. Other than that, all these protests and marches and going up and down and screaming at the top of our heads, it's wasted effort at best. It's a moot point. So this is our hope, our chance to get our voices heard. So I hope everyone joins in the effort. If you go to www.guionjournal.com/wildcat-strike, look that up. That's the article that kind of lays out the foundation of what the Wildcat Strike is. You can also search hashtag Wildcat Strike USA 2021, all one word. On Twitter, you'll find it as well. Look it up, do a web search, you'll find the same thing. Sign up for this. This is not a partisan issue. It's not about politics. It's not about Trump. It's not about Biden. It's not about black, nor is it about white. It's about the collective whole. Martin Luther King in the 1960s, before he was assassinated, started a movement called Poor People's Campaign. Sadly, they killed him because he was trying to unite black folks and white folks and sanitation workers to take on, to defend their economic interests. So we're kind of taking that spirit of MLK a day after the very same government that killed him honored him, and now we're trying to honor him by continuing his work. But instead of the Poor People's Campaign, we're calling this the Power People Campaign, as in it's powered by the people, of the people, for the people. And so please join in the effort. Take a day off tomorrow. Tomorrow is the catalyst. But it doesn't.
Teddy, I'm going to be honest. Thank you for the call. Thank you for the call. We got one more caller, and I want to make sure we have time for him. I'm going to put my hand on the table here, and I'm sorry for the betrayal. I am not planning on taking tomorrow off. I am planning on being a scab, in part because not only do I like my job, but I try to, and I think we do act as a public service, trying to educate our audience about stuff that's going on, and trying to provide a platform to guests like yourself, who can express some vocal opposition to the way that things are going in this country. But I get where you're going with this, and good luck. Jamarl, we got another caller, but any brief comment?
Like I said, I don't think I'm taking my day off tomorrow either. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm not. However, I hope this does well. Something needs to be done. And so I like the idea of this kind of mass action. I know they call it wildcat strikes, but I do like the idea of people coming together and getting together for some level of change and some level of organization. So, yeah, I like it. Shelley in Michigan. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hi.
No, I was just going to say I'm on board with it too. Yeah, Shelley from Michigan, you're on the line. What's going on?
Everyone's talking about a calling for action, and I just wanted to throw out
1 minute.
Right now, I do have a petition going for direct democracy. Actually, we got our first interview tonight on Red Economics, so that's kind of exciting as a start. But I more importantly just wanted to wish you guys a happy belated MLK Day.
Same to you. Thank you for the call, Shelley. Real briefly, we got maybe 15 seconds here. Where can people find your petition?
Oh, it's on Action Network it's called Hold a National Vote. It's directed at the Gravel Institute because they're supposed to, finish his life's work, and that's kind of one of his big ones. So it's the idea, there's like an educational curve, but once you hit the curve, it's pretty straightforward.
I totally get where you're coming from. Once you educate a sort of critical mass about a public, if you have a dedicated minority, that is often seen as enough to change the whole. Anyway, we need to go into our big break today. We'll be back tomorrow, folks. Thank you for listening. Happy belated MLK Jr. Day. Hope everybody has a great day. Thank you to our audience, guests, and staff. We will be back tomorrow, folks. Signing off, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, another one in the record books. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us. My voice is a little stretched today, to put it mildly. I'm congested. So I'm going to apologize and hopefully that will work itself out as the course of the day goes on. You may not see me later today. I have a doctor's appointment for today that may take me away from being on the show today, but you will see me tomorrow, and we will pick up as normal on the Progressive Soapbox tomorrow. I'm trying to get my wife to do a contributor appreciation segment with me, but we'll see. We'll play by ear. But you guys will probably see me tomorrow. As you can see, I'm horsed and everything else. I'm not gonna stay that way. It'll change. It always does. I'm gonna say like, I'm gonna say share, and I'm gonna say subscribe.